When you think of the great 8th century Chinese poet Li Bai, what's the first image that pops into your head? For a lot of us, he's this larger-than-life figure, right? The poet immortal, a kind of romantic, free-spirited genius who feels more like a myth than an actual person. It's lines like these that really built his legend. He's the artist who's literally having a drink with the moon, seeming to float far above all the messy struggles of everyday life. For centuries, that's been the story we've all known. But here's a thought. What if, hidden within the patterns of his 1,000 or so surviving poems, there's actually a secret diary? A kind of data-driven map of a life that was deeply shaped by ambition, failure, and real hardship. Today, we're going to look at how researchers are using that data to find the man behind the immortal myth. So, for well over 1,000 years, the way we understood Li Bai came from literary critics. They analyzed his style, his themes, and his huge personality. And this traditional way of looking at him gave us the poet immortal. But now, there's this new field called digital humanities, and it offers a totally different lens. Instead of close reading, poring over every word of a single poem, researchers use what's called distant reading. They zoom way out and treat a poet's entire body of work, not as a sacred text, but as one massive data set, looking for big statistical patterns you could never spot otherwise. Armed with this completely new approach, researchers are basically becoming a new kind of literary detective. Their mission is to systematically dig into the links between Li Bai's incredible art and his pretty turbulent life. The project's goal was, incredibly ambitious. The idea was to take all of Li Bai's nearly 900 surviving poems and turn them into this rich, five-dimensional database, linking every single one to a time, a place, his social status, and even his economic situation. So you might be wondering, how on earth do you turn beautiful poetry into cold, hard data? Well, it's this really fascinating four-step process. First, you digitize and structure all the texts. Second, you go through and tag them for specific images and themes. Third, you connect each poem to a specific period in the poet's life. And then finally, you plot it all on a map. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty here, because this is where the real magic happens. How exactly do you turn words like moon or sorrow into actual data points that a computer can understand? So using natural language processing tools, things like Python and a system called Marcus, the researchers combed through every poem, tagging thousands of keywords. They sorted them into these big categories: natural imagery like mountains and clouds, human objects like wine and swords, emotional states, and even words that were related to specific times and places. But, all this data is pretty much useless without context, right? So the researchers had to connect it to the poet's life. They divided his biography into 4 really distinct phases: his early years spent wandering and looking for a government job, his short, super prestigious time as a poet in the emperor's court, his years of wandering again after he was kicked out, and finally, his last, really difficult years during a devastating civil war. And this whole setup leads to one really powerful question. As Li Bai's social status and his financial security went up and down, did the very words he chose to write with change too? Did his art actually reflect his reality? And this, right here, is where the investigation starts to pay off. It's where all those little data points begin to click together and form a completely new picture of the artist. So, let's zero in on the 2 most extreme periods of his life. First, the Hanlin period, from 742 to 744. This is when he was at the absolute peak of his social status, serving the emperor. And then, his later years, after 755, when he was disgraced, exiled, and living through incredible hardship during the An Lushan Rebellion. Now, you'd probably expect the poetry to get darker and more grim as his life got harder, right? But the data shows the exact opposite. The core idea was proven right. As Li Bai's real-world fortunes plummeted, his poetry actually became more romantic, not less. His use of words like immortal, the very thing that defines his legend, actually spiked during his most difficult years. This suggests his famous romanticism wasn't the product of a carefree life, but maybe an escape from a harsh one. The ultimate endgame for all this work is to create something called a literary map. Basically, using GIS mapping technology, researchers can plot everything, the poems, the images, the themes, onto a map of Tang Dynasty China. It creates this amazing interactive tool that visually connects the art to the artist's physical journey. So, what's the big takeaway here? What does this new, data-driven story of Li Bai really tell us about art and about the people who make it? Well, it gives us a far more complex and, honestly, a much more human portrait. Li Bai wasn't some detached immortal floating above the world. He was a man deeply connected to everything happening around him, whose creative work was a direct and even measurable response to his triumphs and his tragedies. His art wasn't just about what he saw in the sky, it was about what he felt on the ground.
And this matters for a few huge reasons. First, it gives us a powerful new blueprint for understanding how any artist's life shapes their work. I mean, think about it. You could apply this same method to his famous contemporary Du Fu, or even to Shakespeare. And second, it creates incredible new interactive tools, like that literary map, that could completely change how we teach and learn about literature forever.
Ultimately, what this all shows us is the incredible power of looking at old stories with brand new tools. And it leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought. If data can give us a kind of GPS for a poet's soul from 1300 years ago, whose hidden story should we uncover next?